everybody to the eighth hot politics lab of the season. It must be the 10th or something along these lines. Yeah, it's only the 10th more or less, and not the last, but definitely also not the least. Welcome also if you are one person online. Thanks for joining. You are very welcome. Also here in the room. Tobias Rohrbach, it is a pleasure that you are here. You are a frequent visitor doing some excellent work on gender and politics and stereotypes, which I think you will be talking about today. So the floor is yours for the first half, and then we have Maaike.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I will really be talking about stereotypes and also about like how to disentangle certain stereotypical expectations that voters have of politicians. And I will really be looking at this from the perspective of gender. So what kind of gender expectations matter for the way that voters perceive candidates. And I want to kind of start with this image because I think there's this really kind of deep-rooted idea or expectation in the literature, but also I think it's part of conventional wisdom that women represent these kind of aliens in a masculinized political landscape. And there's this idea of like a disconnect of what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a good political leader. And the literature has kind of used different labels to describe this disconnect. A double bind, or as an example of the think manager, think male effect, or even like this damn if you do, damn if you don't effect, which gets wordy very quickly. So what we would expect then is kind of a whole body of literature or like evidence showing that all is bad for women, and there's a lot of bias from the side of voters against women politicians. But actually, that's not really the case. Those are examples of two very recent meta-analyses that show that, you know, on average, there's very little explicit or overt bias against women candidates when you kind of pitch them next to each other, like in a candidate choice experiment. And on the left, that's a recent meta-analysis by Schwartz and Koppak, and on the right, that's our own meta-analysis that was my first PhD paper, where we kind of look at what type of framings of candidate gender attributes have an effect of what types of evaluations. And one of our kind of key finding was that there is variability across studies, and framing of candidate traits accounts for some of this variability. So there's something going on with traits. So kind of the next logical step was to really zoom in on what is happening with these traits and kind of try to get a better understanding of what traits work when, for whom, basically. So this is what I'll do today. And there's this one kind of theoretical framework that has been super central in this literature, which is role congruity theory, which starts with the very basic idea that people have inherently different beliefs about women and men. And these beliefs come in two types of forms, let's say. So that there are prescriptions, how women or men should be. Those are desirable traits generally. And there are proscriptions, so how women and men shouldn't be. Those are typically undesirable traits. And here kind of like the quintessential difference here is that masculine stereotypes are defined in terms of agency. So they're supposed to be competent, strong, assertive, and they're not supposed to be weak, emotional, and like yielding. And this is kind of different from feminine stereotypes, which are more defined in terms of communality. So they're supposed to be communal, but they're really not supposed to be lacking communality. And now the core hypothesis or the core statement of this theory is that there's incongruity happening for women. So this can be kind of visualized that way, where masculine stereotypes and leadership stereotypes overlap. Like they're basically the same, they have the same stereotype concept, basically. And this is this congruity produces more, let's say, pleasant responses because all is well, basically. For women in politics, this doesn't really happen because there's this clash between feminine stereotype expectations and leadership expectations, and this incongruity is unpleasant and is supposed to produce negative responses because voters have to reconcile two different sets of expectations. And So there's incongruity happening. It's just the problem is a bit that we don't really know where or when or what this incongruity is exactly. Because like in the evaluation process, there are various moments or stages where incongruity can happen. And the bulk of the literature looks at the very, very last step. So the step where the evaluation happens. Basically, this is saying, are candidates who have or have not certain traits, how are they evaluated? But I think there's also like, it's worth to kind of take a step back and look at earlier stages in this process. So just think about, do people just, in the absence of any individuating information, prefer different traits in a gender-based way? And even a step further back, it's about saying, are there different perceptions about the general categories of, so the category of a woman, or the category of a female politician, or a male politician? So this is kind of what I'll be doing what I've been doing in 5 different survey experiments. And I will be talking about all of them, so I will be quick. And if there are questions, please don't hesitate to ask in the end. The first 2 studies look at incongruity in trait evaluation. And what I've done here is basically I've done two studies doing the exact same thing, basically. It's a 2x4 kind of vignette survey experiment where I used this fake newspaper article about a candidate's local performance at a rally. While in one version it's a man, in the other version it's a woman candidate. And the versions differ also in terms of the stereotype traits that I kind of ascribe to them in the vignette. So I think in this example, it's the low communality condition where either Patricia or Patrick Baker is described as being stubborn, unable to compromise, domineering, and rebellious. So this is really the low communality condition. And then what I do is I ask participants, well, how do you feel towards this candidate? Would you vote for this candidate? How viable do you think this candidate is, etc.? So those are the outcome variables. The 2 studies only differ in terms of kind of the sample and the way I recruited it. There's a lot going on here, so I'm just going to kind of walk you through what I think are the main highlights. This first part here, that's the condition where candidates are described as warm and loyal and cooperative. Here in light green, we see that women fare well doing this. So emphasizing their own communality works better for women than it does for men. And this is kind of in line with expectations, and this is also in line with kind of the literature. So that's good. And there is kind of a flip side to this. So if women don't or fail to emphasize their own communality, if they're being described as, or if they come across as rebellious, domineering, aggressive, etc. So this creates backlash. People don't like this. Nobody likes an arrogant woman. That's like someone that I heard this in a focus group once. So, and that's really true, or that's what I see at least. And this finding holds across outcomes and across studies. Okay, so the story seems to be about communality more than it seems to be about agency, really. That's kind of the first takeaway. In studies 3 and 4, I kind of take this step back by just making it a bit simpler. The story will become simpler in the sense that I use the same material, but this time I take out all the trait manipulations and only manipulate gender. So instead of using these traits as an independent variable, I use them now as an outcome, basically, because I'm interested in seeing if people will perceive differences along these 4 trait dimensions only on the basis of gender. And in study 3, there's only textual gender cues, such as pronouns and first name, while in study 4, I include a visual, so an image, and I also include the first name in the headline, just to make gender more salient, basically. Because with the expectation that saliency should kind of increase the differences along these trait dimensions. So in study 3, without kind of being technical about it, I ran Bayesian OLS regression models, and this is just kind of intuitively very clear that the distributions overlap to a big extent. So there's little difference between women and men candidates on the basis of gender alone in terms of the trait inferences that are being made. And so some differences start to emerge when gender becomes more salient, and I think that's interesting. And the differences tend to be in kind of the expected direction, where men are slightly more perceived as being more authentic, women are being perceived as more communal. So this seems to make sense. But overall, I still kind of want to point to the fact that these differences are in terms of effect size or in terms of magnitude, they are super small. And if you did this in a frequentist way, those results will not be significant. So this should kind of like as a heads up. Overall, not much going on. So in the last study, I was interested in kind of looking whether there are differences just in the general perception. Because if voters have kind of different perceptions of how traits are kind of distributed across social categories, then maybe they adjust for these differences while kind of evaluating or something. So it would be, I think it's interesting to look at this level of the trait perception as well. So here I don't have any like vignette or anything. I just basically replicate studies that have done this before and ask the question, well, how desirable do you think in American society, because it's a US sample, for a woman in general, or a female politician, or a male politician to have one of the following 70 traits? And then I look at differences between kind of these two groups, so women versus male politicians and female politicians versus women, both on the level of the individual trait and the same kind of trait scales. And first, for the trait scales, the two top rows are female politicians and women in general. And kind of the takeaway here is, without kind of understanding the color scheme, is that there's not much of a difference. The perception of how desirable these traits are really close between women in general and female politicians. But there are some differences, mainly between female politicians and male politicians. And again, this is kind of in the expected direction, where male politicians are seen as more agentic in general, but they're also perceived as less communal in general. Okay, so this is just showing that there are some differences, and they mostly concern these two kind of positive dimensions. It's not about what they lack, it's about what they have. And women have more of this, more communality, and male politicians have more of agency. Okay, so I think I'm gonna skip this. This like those are the 70 traits. I can come back to this a bit later. There's not much going on. And I kind of conclude that overall, I think that one key takeaway really is that incongruity, when it's there, there's not a lot of it. So just in terms of the size of it, it's not like a super big driver of difference in terms of gender. And that's one kind of that's one way of interpreting it. Another would be to say, well, maybe even if there is incongruity, maybe we just underestimate the capacity of people to reconcile conflicting expectations. Because I think, intuitively speaking, we're constantly in situations where we have to reconcile different expectations, and we do this very naturally. So it's a bit weird to kind of think of this as this big problem. I think that's one way of looking at this. Another kind of takeaway, which is more optimistic, is that communality works for women candidates. Not only do women politicians who emphasize their own communality receive better evaluations compared to men, but if they emphasize their own communality, it also kind of preempts a perceived lack of communality, which incurs backlash. So to avoid backlash, you just kind of make sure that you're perceived as someone communal, and this should kind of help you navigate some of the danger zones of the political kind of like campaigning area. And lastly, I'm not really satisfied with incongruity as a mechanism. Maybe that's kind of already clear now by now. I don't really know what it is. Like, what is it of the incongruity that drives people's outcomes? I think it might be just a story about like gut response, about affect. Like people, think maybe the term are used could be used as synonyms. I'm not really sure. I think this deserves more attention, and I am willing to do this in the future, but I can't right now. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Tobias. Super exciting work. Yes. Let's see. Who has a question? Yeah. Yes.
Hi, yes, thanks so much. I have a question about social desirability with especially with the last one, with the traits that people want to see in politicians, or also the ones that they see in politicians. I wasn't quite sure how it was phrased. It was about what they want or what they see, but either way, I wonder how you see social desirability, and if, for example, you see group differences, groups between groups where you would expect them to be more aware of gender biases, and they might correct them, and then groups who maybe are less aware of them. If you've looked at any of these perspectives.
Yeah, that kind of, I think it is a problem. So the studies that I based this kind of conceptual replication on, they proposed several ways of addressing this by kind of like having an introduction where they brief candidates, that it's participants, that it's completely normal to have views about social categories, and that stereotyping is a useful, like, adaptive thing for society, and that it's not about what you think, it's about what people in general believe. So this is kind of to maybe ease the way for participants to feel okay about doing these ratings. I'm not sure if this is like super successful, or if it gets rid of the problem altogether. So what I also did is I didn't only have 3 categories. I also had politician, so without the gender label, and person without the gender label, as like reference groups where I could control women in general to a person in general. I haven't really looked at all of this, to be fair, because for this kind of study, I'm more interested in these 3 categories. But I could do this and see whether the baseline for the comparison is already kind of slanted towards one direction or the other. But I don't think I can address the problem of social desirability completely.
Yeah, I have one. Interesting project, and my question is about your manipulation of gender. So as I understand, you manipulate the names of 2 politicians as well as pronouns, and then the photos, right?
In one case, yeah.
In one case, yeah. So about names, I was wondering, how do you make sure that you're not inadvertently also varying some other variable when you pick 2 names, one of which is male and the other female? I mean, usually all sorts of associations people have with names, right? But maybe socioeconomic, attractiveness, and there's actually some interesting, an interesting paper on this from the 1970s about how to do this, or how difficult it is to just manipulate names without manipulating all other, so sorry, the gender of names without manipulating all other sorts of things. So I'm wondering whether you have, how you came up with the names.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think it's, for example, had I used the name Karen, for example, that would have created a huge problem, because Karens are apparently universally disliked. I don't subscribe to this, but I think that shows that that's a valid point of criticism. So I chose to name Patrick and Patricia based on kind of previous studies that have pre-tested kind of the names, and they have chosen these names out of like a list of very common names for certain areas. But what I have to say is that those names are not like neutral. They are very clearly white names, with Baker being a typically white last name. So here I am priming basically this idea of a white US American, maybe like upper middle class. And I think that information is in the name. But I think that in terms of Patrick and Patricia, like the connotations that they elicit, I think they are comparable to one another. But I'm not sure how representative of like the general population of women's first names they are, or men's first names.
Yeah, thank you. Very relevant topic, obviously. I'm a bit curious about the relationship between looks and the attribution that people
Makes, so what would you say? So I'm wondering if people read the text, do they have a certain woman in mind, also look-wise? Because I'm wondering, so for example, there is of course also female politicians who are a bit more what we would consider male presenting on the outside, and not as traditionally female presenting. Would they maybe benefit from also more male leader-like attributions compared to women who are very soft-looking, very female presenting? So yeah, I'm kind of curious about that. Also, when it comes to racial biases, right, that we have some damaging ones. So when people read about perhaps aggressive people, there is this stereotype, right, of women. Yeah, whether there are also maybe inferences made when it comes to the looks and what the relationship is there. It'd be really interesting.
I think it'd be super interesting to kind of have a more open way of, yeah, or more inductive way of going to that. This is actually like ask people to, I don't know, like Google search and like invite a link of what they think the candidate that they've just read about looks like. I've seen studies who do this. I think that's super interesting. And I believe that most people will probably, yeah, come up with a white upper middle class Patrick Baker anywhere. But there is some research, not so much in like in context of political, but in political campaigning, but in terms of like leadership and women who present themselves like as butch, basically, they have a stronger risk of kind of incurring these agency-related penalties. So they are more readily perceived as being domineering, rebellious, and kind of like a pain in the ass. Yeah. And there's also some research relating this to gay men who present themselves with like gay talk and who have a more effeminate way of protecting themselves. I know in leadership literature that this also kind of makes it more likely that they fall into like the category of being perceived as more feminine, and they have like then the same boundaries or like double bind situation as some women candidates might have. So that is, I think, a good avenue for future research and transfer this to the context of political evaluation.
Yeah, maybe have multiple visual cues, for example, of like more male face characteristics, for example, or skin color.
Yeah, that's super interesting suggestion. Thank you.
Some beards, guys. Go.
Okay, so I really like your conclusion, and I really like the whole study. And I really, based on my knowledge, I think you're really on something with the communality advantage for women candidates, and it really fits with some of the other research I've seen. But why do so few female politicians, and why are there so few female prominent politicians then, if this is something that voters in an instance have? And this is something I've thought about a lot, and I know it's beyond your research, but I'm just really interested in hearing what you think is going on.
I mean, I do have a thought or two about it.
Yeah.
So I think it's, had I done this study maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I don't think I would have had the same results. This kind of idea of women being allowed to own their own femininity or like use it strategically, I think that's quite new. You can see it with Sanna Marin in Finland, or with Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. That's like a new wave of really successful, strong women in politics who have very different strategies than kind of the first wave of strong women in politics with Margaret Thatcher, or even as someone who as like Angela Merkel, who are constantly kind of, who have been shown to having that, like, they have to establish their masculinity to be able, like, to be taken seriously in a way. So I think this is a recent phenomenon, and it's kind of in line with more the evolution of gender stereotypes in general society, like also outside of politics.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Tobias. I'm going to ask something about the context in which you study this. You mentioned it a little bit in passing already, right? So 15 years ago would be different, but most of the evidence comes from the United States.
Yeah.
So the question is, why study this in the United States? What is it a case of in particular? Because it seems, my impression is that gender and has politicized a little bit there as well. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or versus Liz Cheney. So have you also looked at any heterogeneity on the obvious observed variable partisanship in the United States?
Yeah, so I think the choice to focus on US context, or in one case the UK context, was informed by, on the one hand, pragmatic considerations, because like that's what it was. But it's also about wanting to speak to that body of literature, which is particularly true for the last study, which kind of wants to conceptually replicate studies that have used a US context. So I think it made sense in that case. But I would be very interested to kind of pursue this in a non-US context. And partisanship, I have looked, like for all of these analyses, I have looked at participant ideology and partisanship, but not about candidate partisanship, because that's one additional variable that I didn't want to include. And there's already quite a lot of work on the interaction of partisanship and gender, showing that usually in most cases partisan cues are more important, and in gender starts mattering when you don't like a person to begin with, it will like boost this dislike additionally. That's a very brief oversimplification, but there is literature on this, so I allow myself to like ignore this.
My question is as follows. So if I take sort of the width of the findings in your dissertation, and I'll also look at what Sana has been working on, I get the feeling that a lot of the theories we had are wrong. And so I wonder why that is. And I have one particular explanation. I would be interested to hear your thoughts about this. Evolutionary psychologists would say that, you know, the context, the fitness context really matters. And so there are fitness contexts in which female faces are more successful in terms of these election games, these abstract election games, than male faces. The particular context is when there is a health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that most of this research is collected during the pandemic, do you think that affects the finding?
Maybe. So yeah, and I think that's so. I'll start with the kind of more that second point. I think that it is a valid point that context obviously does matter, but research has also shown that kind of in general the alignment of like gender with traits is a lot weaker than we would expect. And for example, when you focus on candidates' issue domains, and then kind of ask them like how feminine do you think this candidate is, the differences aren't really that big. But if you use personality traits to prime kind of gender stereotypes or to activate gender stereotypes, the effects are a lot stronger. So the issue gender link seems to be not as strong as we might suspect. But again, there are maybe very particular contexts where this is not true, where there is a very strong link. Like I think terrorism is like, and like security is one case where people have a very strong link, but not always a preference for male leaders. It gets complicated very quickly, so I don't feel like super qualified to like make a definitive conclusion. And the first part, like a lot of theories are wrong. Maybe that they're just not so right anymore. And I think that's an important nuance, I think. And it's kind of like up to us to kind of see where the change, where the empirical changes necessitate theoretical adjustments as well, whether the frameworks, whether we should just do away with these older frameworks and come up with new ones. But I think this is really this is a really dynamic field right now, and it's interesting in kind of in what directions it will go in the next couple of years.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Tobias. If you're online, obviously you're welcome to also ask questions. So it's a bit too late for Tobias. You can still email him. That's Matthijs. Oh no, Matthijs not.
Matthijs just said he
Left. But also, if you're not Matthijs, you're okay to ask questions too. Maaike, it's a pleasure to have you here as always. Today, especially, it's nice as your first paper came out, and I think you deserve all the credits for that excellent piece of work. And I'm just going to paraphrase Gijs that it's definitely one of the best studies, if not the best, that we have been part of, and that is because of you. So also here on recording, we're incredibly proud of you, and you should be really proud of yourself. Today, you're not going to talk about what has been published, which is now true, but you're going to talk about some of your ongoing work on gender perception. So it's the Gender Day today. The floor is yours.
I'm totally in the theme with Tobias.
Yeah.
So, really nice. And thank you, Bertha, for the compliments. Yeah, so I'm talking about this project of my dissertation. And in this project, I'm not going to talk much about the emotional, about the double binds. I'm not sure it's working. Oh, now it is. Because, yeah, Tobias already explained a lot about it. But my focus in this project is mostly on the emotions that politicians display and then the difference in how we perceive these emotions in male politicians and female politicians. And well, as Tobias also explained, is that women often encounter this double bind in that they have to adhere to these masculine leadership norms, but on the other hand, also have to behave in a feminine, warm, communal way. And then when you look at emotions, there's also these expectancies related to masculine leadership behavior, which is more dominant emotions, such as anger. Or on the other hand, as women, you should smile more, be warm, etc. So there's also this contrast. And when women express anger, that they often receive a lot of criticism or general emotions, that they're too cold, showing too much emotions, lack of emotions, etc. So there's this backlash. And also research shows that when women show anger, people evaluate them lower, the women, and also they're seen as less competent or as lower social status. So there's research showing that there's like this backlash. Although there's also some research showing it's more complicated, as also from the previous talk, there's really a lot of progress in this field. But in general, we can say women undergo a lot of criticism when they express a lot of emotions. And in this paper, we specifically want to look at emotion perception. So does this backlash already originate when we're trying to perceive the emotions in women and men in politics? Because from the emotion perception literature in psychology, they find that there's also this bias in emotion perception. So people are not 100% accurate in how they perceive emotions in face. So if you have a lot of stereotypes or social context in your head, so for example, you see someone and you know this person is a criminal, then you're more likely to see that person as angry than like happy, for example. But also with other kinds of social contexts or stereotypes. And the most prominent one is with gender. Of course, women are more associated with smiling, being happy, and men with being angry, because that's more of a dominant masculine emotion. Similarly, there's also with dominance, with a high social status, if you say this person is a leader or of high dominance, people are also more likely to recognize anger. And so stereotypes in our heads can really color how we perceive faces and facial expressions. And if we translate it to women in politics, we have several hypotheses. So first, when we look at politicians, we think that when women, because they're in such a salient position as politicians, when they show anger, and anger is in contrast with the feminine stereotype, that this is extra salient, and therefore women are seen as more angry than men in politics. But then if we look at just ordinary, in general, people, now we think that men are perceived as more angry because of this stereotype of men being angry and women being happy. And what we then in this design, we can really compare non-politicians or people in general with politicians. And we can see how adding the context of politicians adds something in this bias of emotion perception. So what we expect is that for men, there's not that much difference because in general, they're already seen as more dominant and therefore also more angry. So then when it's in a political context, so if they're politicians, this wouldn't differ that much. But then for women, we expect some sort of flip. So in general, women are seen as less angry because it's not in the stereotype. But then for politics, because it's more of a dominant, angry atmosphere, women are also perceived as more angry. So this adding this context of politics, of being a politician as a woman, would then increase your perception of anger. And then lastly, we also look at the gender of the respondent, because in some of this research, it seems to matter, but it's really sort of inconsistent what way, if men or women are more biased. So that's why we have this competing hypothesis. But then I want to add a note to this emotion perception literature, because they find more and more that their social context really matters, because in psychology, they often just show a standardized picture of a happy face or whatever kind of universal standard expression. And then that's a signal. And then they ask, okay, which emotion is expressed? So they get a list of all these emotion categories and you just have to tick a box. But there's a recent paper from Ursula Hess and also others that says, no, this doesn't really give room to a lot of bias, because it's just ticking a box, a very cognitive task, just putting a label on a face. And we really miss the social context. And in psychology, we should really use more of the social context. And so she says we should look at the target emotion. So for example, if someone is smiling, we should look at an intensity. So how much do we think this person is smiling, but also at the secondary emotions. So for example, with politicians, we could think, oh, they're smiling. We could also think, oh, it's a little bit fake, or there's also some contempt in it. So it's also interesting to look at these secondary emotions. So that's also just to say that I'm also going to look in my analysis at these secondary emotions, and actually I find quite interesting results also there. So what did I do? We had two studies on MTurk. First, a study just basically one design in which we showed these pictures, and maybe you recognize them also from Tobias. It's the same pictures. These are UK members of parliament, and they all have these portrait pictures that are really quite similar. So we chose a range of these pictures, and then we manipulated them to either express neutral or angry expression. And of this pool of pictures, we randomly presented these pictures as subsets, and then we let people rate these pictures, and we said, okay, these are politicians. What are they expressing? What kind of emotions are they expressing? And then we have 5 emotion categories: sadness, disgust, anger, happiness, and neutral. And then it's on a 7-point scale. And then for the second study, we add the non-politician condition, and we add a little bit more of a frame. We're saying these pictures are actually taken during debates, and you will see snapshots of people from the audience. That's one half of the sample, or people, or actually the politicians. So we can compare sort of the non-politician condition with politicians and see how politics as being a politician adds to this dominance, and then especially to this perception. And this is a bigger sample, the second study. So if we look at the results, so the main question is whether women in politics are perceived as more angry than men. And in study 1, we see this direction. In general, all the effects are super small. So probably you also won't see it that much, but there are some differences that are significant, especially in the second study, because there we have a larger sample. So in the second study, it's significantly different that when there's an angry face, so angry expression, that women are perceived as more angry than men. And these manipulations of these expressions are in the same intensity. So it's not that, yeah, there's differences, of course, there are facial features that are different, but we have a range of different politicians, so that's sort of evens that out. We don't really see this happening in the neutral face condition. I have to say, for the second study, I made sure that because these are portrait pictures, the neutral faces are not so completely neutral, because they're still portrait pictures, so how people want others to see them. So in the second study, I slightly manipulated the neutral field to be a little bit more neutral. So that's also why you see there's a little bit more higher anger score. Oh yeah, and here I find an interaction effect for male respondents. So men in general have more of this bias. So they're more biased to see more anger in women than then looking at the secondary emotions, so other skills that we have, we also asked how much they see disgust and sadness expressed in these faces. I think here are quite interesting and stronger results. So across the two studies, we find that when women look angry, they're perceived as expressing more disgust than men, whereas men are perceived as expressing more sadness than women. So I think that's also quite interesting, and we see it in both studies. So I'm also interested to hear what you think about this, especially because disgust is sort of related to moral violations, and sadness is more related to vulnerability. So I think it's interesting to see for women that when they're angry, they're seen as that they're expressing disgust. As for men, it's more sadness. Yeah, and then we're looking at this difference between non-politicians and politicians. And actually, we see the same pattern. We thought maybe if you add this, if you put someone from just being a person in the audience to being a politician, it would increase anger perceptions, but we don't find this. So again, we find for non-politicians that women are generally seen as more angry than men when they're having an angry expression, which is not necessarily in line with previous literature. But I think because in an angry face, it's very clear when someone is expressing anger. This is so in contrast with the female stereotype, but then it's also more salient. And as you would expect more of this man angry, woman happy association in a neutral, more ambiguous spaces. But I think in general, the emotion perception literature just needs to study this more because yeah, some use response time, some use like this accuracy, ticking a box, some use like they use morphed pictures from angry to happy, and then when do you see which emotion? So there's a lot of variation in how it's measured. But here we see sort of something else than the literature would say in psychology. And again, if we look at the difference between non-politicians and politicians for disgust and sadness, we also see like the same pattern of women being, when they express angers, being seen as expressing more disgust than men, and men as expressing more sadness. And then I wanted to add this sort of noise variable. So what Ursula Hess and others say is that when we look at this bias in emotion perceptions, we should not look at the target emotion, but at the other emotions that people perceive in the face. And that's that other emotions, that's actually noise. And that is actually reflecting how much, how less accurate we are for certain categories to perceive their emotions. And what we see, so I made a variable in which I made a mean of the other emotions than anger. So sadness, disgust, happiness, etc. And what we see in general, that politicians have more of this noise. So in general, politicians are seen as expressing more emotions than non-politicians. And the category with the most noise are the female politicians. So that also sort of reflects that we have more uncertainty of how to rate their faces. So yeah, in general, there is a very small effect of women being perceived as angrier. But this was only a second study with a bigger sample. And then we don't find that that's ordinary or people in general, like this association with men angry, women happy. I think there's just really a lot of more research to be done to include more context when perceiving emotions. And I think it's very intriguing what we find with the secondary emotions. And I'd like to hear what you think about it. And I think, after this, there should be more research done linking the perception that we have of these emotions to this backlash. And in another project that I'm doing, we're seeing actually that there's not that much backlash when it comes to vote choice, also with women using anger. So it's more maybe about this like criticism that women receive on Twitter, etc. So that's maybe why what this perception, bias in perception, is what we're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Maaike. Questions?
Yeah, thanks, Maaike. Very interesting. I wondered, did you find any differences between the gender of the audience? Like who is watching these politicians? Like, did men respond differently from women or so? What did you find there?
Yeah. So I think I put it on the first slide, but it wasn't really clear enough. But in both studies, men tend to be more biased.
Okay.
In this seeing more anger in women. But in general, like the effect is not really strong. And the overall main effect, it differs a little bit. In the first study, it was more women who saw more anger, and then in the second study, it was more men. But then if you really look at the interaction effect, it's in both studies, it's men being more biased.
So you just missed it.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah.
Super cool research. I find it super interesting. And I was kind of wondering whether maybe with the discussed cases, especially, people made inferences about specific traits. Now I'm a bit crying probably. But just so considering you see this angry woman, and so she seems very dominant, which may be also associated with an arrogance as a trait. And I feel like disgust could be very closely linked with arrogance, right? Like looking down upon people.
Yeah.
So that is sort of like a link I'd be interested in, whether these people who think that the woman looks disgusted also would consider her to be arrogant.
Yeah, and that's also what I would think, that the appraisals they make, why they look angry, and that maybe for women they think it's really some sort of moral violation. They're really angry because something really huge happened. But for men, or I can say it better. For women, they might think it's because she is angry, and for men, it could be that they're thinking, oh, the situation is just bad, and that's why he's angry and sad.
Yeah, or not just angry, but general a dominant woman who then also will show probably other traits in that.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe it's not just the isolated emotion, but further inferences then about the persona behind it. And that would be but that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think it would be very interesting to show the face and then ask like really inferences, like why would she be angry and dominance and that kind of stuff.
Thanks for the presentation. This is a really cool study, and I think it's a really good idea to. I'm really excited about this. The other emotions that get linked and this this whole approach is great. I have two questions. So one is, I think for you very easy to answer. Maybe the other one too. But so you mentioned that the manipulation is of the same intensity, and because I was just wondering how we know that, considering that people don't rate them of the same intensity. And my other question is that something that I've been puzzling over in this literature about stereotypes is that sometimes it seems that the contrast to a stereotype makes something more salient, and then we're like, oh yeah, we perceive it more. But sometimes it also seems to be the case that if we do something counter-stereotypically, it's not perceived because we perceive through our stereotypes. So we behavior that's counter-stereotypical is invisible. So I'm a bit confused by this. And I was wondering what your thoughts are.
For your second point, I'm totally in the same direction, because indeed with the sort of ordinary people, you would think, okay, women you would see more happy because it's in line with the stereotype. But then I find the exact opposite. And so I'm also more like, what is it sort of this confirmation bias, what you see and you believe you see, or is it salient because it's the opposite? And my study shows it's the opposite, but it's very hard to find in this literature what it's still a little bit inconsistent. And also what you see in the literature when you look at like women showing different kinds of emotions. In some studies, it's very clear that they decrease the evaluations, and in other contexts, it's actually men who get punished for not showing more manly emotions in certain contexts. And so it's really still a little bit unclear to me as well. And for the first question, what we did is that we have these action units in the face that are all these codes for different muscles. And there's this program software that you can make a template over the face, and then you can literally put in the intensity of how much you want the eyebrows to be lower or higher, same for smiling, etc. So that we did for each politician. So that's how we sort of manipulate all the intensities the same way. Of course, everyone has a different face. So for some people, it's harder to make them look angry than for others. But this is, yeah, sort of inevitable because people are just very different. That's why we have a range of different pictures. But we try, what I also did is that I run them through face reader and to see whether they're all perceived. So this is an emotion recognition software to see indeed whether they're all perceived as angry. But of course, such an algorithm can also be rotten, so you never, you know. But that's why we have a range of different politicians and try to really manipulate them in the same number of intensity. Yeah.
Yeah, the super cool. The noise seems really interesting because that was the secondary, the level of secondary emotions in general, right?
Yeah.
And that was more for politicians.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I was wondering if you said something about more uncertainty. Do you have other ideas about what this could be? Because maybe think about people seeing politicians as more dishonest or having like a double agenda or something. Or I'm just curious what you think about the mechanism.
Yeah, I think people, if you say, if you really have the context of the study, it's people from the audience and politicians. Yeah. I think people in the audience might have less emotions than the politicians themselves. They are the ones really fighting, but yeah, I think in general, I think there's more literature showing that people associate, or politics is associated with more emotions than just in general. And I think maybe people have a lot of more reasons to think, oh, this person is angry, but also a little bit happy, or I don't know, I should actually also look at attractiveness, whether that has an effect, because maybe, I don't know. It's interesting to see what that study suggested, that you should look at the secondary emotions, because there's just more noise if you're not sure exactly how to perceive an emotion. And that's, I think, what's happening. With female politicians, we just don't know what exactly is their motivation to being angry. And therefore we have this more nuances in these other ones. Yeah.
Maaike, can you say something about the effects of the gender differences that we see, the sizes of them? Because could the alternative interpretation not be, actually, so not all that bad, tiny little bit of difference, but neglectable differences.
Yeah.
Is that, but it partly relates to what the range of the full scale is, because I didn't really understand what this 1, 2, 3 was. Like on the, so do you help me a little bit there?
Yeah, so the scale is from 0 to 6, so it's really in general low. It's also because anger, if you like a full-blown 6 would be someone that's really shouting. So if in a picture, it's often rated around the mid scale. But no, you're totally right, and I think that's also sort of the main takeaway, that these differences are super small. You need quite a large sample to actually find them. And also what I was saying in this other project, this election game study that we're doing, we have like these posters and people can vote for different politicians. And then we also have women showing anger and happiness, etc. And then women are not really punished at all. And there's also no interaction with anger. So what I think is maybe on the long run, if you really look at vote choice, it might not have an effect, but maybe for if there's, I don't know, a news article and you see a snapshot of a woman in politics, and then that might elicit quite a reaction, maybe on Twitter, maybe backlash, just more this immediate reaction that people have on social media, which is more, I think, immediate. But I think that should be studied. Maybe it doesn't really have a consequence, and it's just a small bias and doesn't.
Yeah, and staying closer to this study, it has at least like the effects seem very small. So it says we often talk about that there's these huge disadvantages, but maybe here not that much.
Maybe it's like similar.
Yeah.
That's we should not look so much at the differences, but more on the similarities, and that there's not that much actually. Maybe indeed, if you did this study 15 years ago, it was also already quite different than now.
It would at least be good to quantify what these effect sizes are, what they substantively mean.
Yeah.
It could still be, you could still think like small effects could be important.
So just super short, like I'm still like kind of wondering about, are we using the same theories? And I think maybe we still are, but we're just like missing something.
Yeah.
And I want this to be like a story about individual differences, where maybe the effects are there, but on average they are kind of like they disappear because we're looking at a sample that's maybe too diverse. So do you have any data, like, I don't know, people hostile benevolent sexism, or how they range like gender essentialist views? So maybe the effects are there for people who are high in gender essentialism, but not for those who are low in gender essentialism, or the other way around. It's actually not difficult to.
Yeah, that's a good question. I do have those in my data for the second study. I haven't actually looked at them. I think I might look at the distribution, and it was a little bit skewed, but I have to look into it more. And you're right, yeah, maybe we should look also more on these differences, and maybe they can also sort of highlight the result, or like make them stronger, that it's more really the stereotype that is driving this bias. And yeah.
We have 2 more questions, and we need to find the sponsor. So it's always on you. Yeah.
I can ask David.
There's a remark about the media comment that was made about this puzzle why sometimes behaviors are inconsistent with the stereotypes, sometimes more consistent. And I'm currently doing a course on stereotypes and prejudice, and I learned that we have to, like, there's this double dissociation model, which means that there are stereotypes, and that's like the cognitive level, like cognitive associations, and that's a theory, right? Like this congruity and the stereotypes that we're talking about, that's all on the cognitive level. But then there's implicit evaluation, which is this emotional realm. So I'm wondering whether that would be something to account for in the study you do, that maybe there's a bit of a mismatch of the theory and what we're actually testing, and that maybe we need to integrate that better.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, very good. Yeah, I think indeed the previous literature has, for example, has these vignettes and then saying politician, and then what they're saying is very angry or manipulating really what they're saying, and then they're asking on self-reported scale, like how do you rate this politician? And of course, it's more a cognitive also task, and I think. Or would you not agree?
No, I think that's emotional, right? We're looking at a face and we rate an emotion. That's implicit evaluation, but we don't.
Yeah, that's what I also meant. That like this previous literature is not using faces and it's really asking about evaluations when you see that there's something manipulated, or although if my study at least is way more implicit, because they hopefully don't really see it's about gender and it's about perception. So you don't explicitly ask them how to evaluate these politicians. So that might be different from previous literature, which is indeed using these more cognitive theories.
But there's like, I'm talking about implicit stereotyping and implicit evaluation. So there is also a level where you can test cognitions, like implicit association tests, where you see whether they are different like whether participants who rate high in like cognitive stereotypes also evaluate these like things like female politicians more angry than maybe I don't know.
Yeah, no, indeed, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe you can indeed look at the literature from that angle and see indeed whether they have different findings in that sense. Yeah, no, it's interesting point.
Round up.
Yeah, thank you, Maaike. Thank you, everybody here for being here. Thank you also online, and those who are still around. We have 2 more meetings, one regular politics lab next week, Friday, which is Christine Schultz, who is my colleague at the Amsterdam School of Communication Research, and who will talk about work on the neural correlates of polarization. So that is exciting. And then December 9th, we have a half-a-day program for the political psychology meeting with Ming Boyer presenting. Maaike present? No, not Maaike. Great. We have Borja Martinovic from the University of Utrecht. Thank you, Christian. And Linette Durmusoglu presenting, as well as Ming Boyer from the University of Vienna. So an exciting program. And then it's time for Christmas break, and we'll be back somewhere with the new year. Thank you. The sponsors, yeah, thanks, obviously. First of all, we thank the University of Amsterdam, the ASSR, ASCOR, the European Research Council, the Dutch Science Foundation, and the Association for Politics and the Life Sciences. And if you want to sponsor, also people here in the room, that is very well possible. So thank you very much.